It happens more often than anyone likes to admit. A studio spends 5, maybe 10 years building something, and the final product just feels confused. You see massive budgets thrown in projects where nobody in the room seems to know what the actual game is supposed to be. It is fascinating to look at the wreckage. We usually focus on the big wins, but the titles that miss the mark entirely often have way more interesting stories attached to them. I'll start with Anthem. There's a moment when you first jump off that platform in Fort Tarsis and your javelin's thrusters kick in, where it feels like BioWare actually cracked the code. The weight of the suit, the way the metal hisses when you hit the water to cool your engines, it is top quality stuff. It was a third-person flyer-shooter hybrid, and for 10 minutes, it felt like playing the future of the medium. But then, the flight stopped there. The world is a big, colorful bowl of nothing. It involved just flying from one circle to another, shooting the same 3 bug enemies and waiting for a loot drop that never quite felt right. Those flight mechanics were the only thing that gave the game a heartbeat. It's a digital ghost now. There was a clear struggle between the side that wanted a story-heavy RPG and the side that wanted a live service machine. The way the game sat, it felt like a collection of ideas that never learned how to talk to each other. It's a tragedy of management because the act of just being in that world felt more satisfying than you'd have expected. It was worth looking at just to see how much work went into those suits. The same kind of identity crisis happened with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, but in a way that feels even more annoying because of the studio's history. They went from the atmospheric, tactile world of the Arkham games to chasing live service trends with an endless loop of gear grinding, battle pass slogging, and covering the screen with UI clutter. It's a looter shooter where everyone, even Captain Boomerang, just uses a gun. Why give a guy a magical boomerang and then tell him he needs to find a legendary assault rifle to be effective? The traversal is actually quite fun, jumping around Metropolis as King Shark or Harley feels smooth, but then the realization hits that you're just doing the same 3 mission types forever. Though the story beats are actually surprisingly well acted. They're trapped inside a game that focuses on gear scores more than the plot. It's a weirdly cynical experience, a game that seems to hate the legacy of the characters it's using. It's a clean piece of software, but it feels like it was made to satisfy a quarterly report rather than a player. That friction between the player and the world is even louder in Forspoken. You are Frey, a girl from New York who gets pulled into a fantasy world called Athia, and you have a talking bracelet named Cuff. The core of the game is magic parkour. When you are actually moving, dashing over rocks, and scaling cliffs with elemental light, it feels satisfying. The magic system has a lot of variety, with different trees for earth, fire, and water, but then the characters start talking.
What is this weird feeling?
There seems to be some sort of malignant miasma in the air.
Okay, turning back now.
It doesn't seem to be affecting you, though, does it?
Dialogue has this defensive, self-aware quality that makes it hard to feel any investment in what is happening on screen. The writing undercuts the fantasy at every turn, and the world itself looks a bit gray and washed out, which is a shame because the particle effects from your spells are actually top tier. Half your time is spent doing these incredibly cool acrobatics, and the other half standing still while 2 characters have a tedious conversation. It's a game that works best when you turn the dialogue volume down and just focus on the rhythmic flow of the movement. If you can find it cheap, it's worth a look, just for the traversal alone. If Forspoken is a case of bad writing, Alien's Colonial Marines is a case of a broken promise. This is a game that is famous for all the wrong reasons. The trailers show what looks like the ultimate tribute to the films, but the actual experience looks like a dated shooter from a previous era. The lighting is flat, the textures are muddy, and the xenomorphs, the most terrifying hunters in cinema, are completely brain dead. They walk into walls or just stand there while you shoot them. The most fascinating part of this game is the technical story behind it. There is a typo in the code that has a ruinous effect on the enemy AI. One single letter kept the aliens from being the hunters they were supposed to be. It's a clumsy, frustrating experience that feels like a betrayal of the source material. Yet there is a weird charm to the jankiness if you play it with a friend in co-op. You can see the skeleton of a good game under all the mess, and the sound design of the pulse rifle is still spot on. It's a lesson in how not to manage a licensed project. Mass Effect Andromeda had this similar weight of expectation, but the failure feels more personal because we all loved Shepard. This is meant to be a new start in a new galaxy, but it exists with these bizarre facial animations that turn every emotional scene into a joke. The characters look like puppets with broken strings. Beyond the glitches though, the combat is actually the best the series has ever had. It's fast, vertical, and lets you swap powers on the fly without being locked into a single class. You get to explore these massive planets in the Nomad, and some of the environments are truly well designed. But the writing feels like a diluted version of the original trilogy. Instead of high stakes and complex politics, you get a lot of Pathfinder jargon that never quite hits the mark. The tension just isn't there. It feels like a cover band playing the hits. The notes are right, but the soul is missing. I still think the combat makes it worth a playthrough if you can look past the tired faces, but it's a reminder that a great RPG needs more than just good shooting to stay relevant. Then you have Duke Nukem Forever, which is less of a game and more of a historical artifact. It spent 14 years in development, and it exists as a relic from a different era. The humor is stuck in 1997, the graphics are a patchwork of different engines, and the loading screens are long enough to make you forget what you were doing. It's a linear shooter that tries to be everything, a driving game, a puzzle game, a turret shooter, and it doesn't do any of them particularly well. But there's something oddly compelling about how messy it is. You can see the layers of development hell in every level. One minute you're in a high-tech lab, the next you're in a generic desert. It's a time capsule of bad ideas and outdated tropes. I'll be frank, playing it today feels like visiting a museum of early 2000s game design. It's cumbersome and often offensive, but as a piece of industry history, it's fascinating. It's not a good game, but it's a memorable one, if only because it actually managed to exist after everyone gave up on it. With Medal of Honor Warfighter, the experience sits permanently in the shadow of Call of Duty. The development involved actual Tier 1 operators for authenticity, yet the campaign feels sterile and generic. When you move through these heavily directed levels, you see environments that look expensive but somehow feel hollow. There's that driving sequence in the middle of the game that is actually quite well done, though it seems like it was pulled from an entirely different project. The gunplay is significant and the sound design is loud, but there's very little reason to keep playing. The strict adherence to military realism completely overshadows any sense of entertainment. The multiplayer has some decent ideas, like the fire team system where you and a partner work together, but it is lost in the noise of better shooters. It's a perfectly functional, clean game, but it is also entirely forgettable, and it fades from memory almost immediately after turning it off. For me, Skull and Bones falls short of why people loved the naval combat in Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Ubisoft called it a high-end game, which was an embarrassing bit of marketing considering how limited the pirate fantasy feels. The game is a loop of sailing to a point, holding a button to gather wood or iron, and then fighting other ships. The naval combat itself is fine, the cannons are significant, and the water actually looks high quality. But the lack of land combat or boarding combat like Black Flag makes it feel limited. It's a typical live service loop where you are constantly checking menus and managing resources. But I will say the customization of the ships is actually quite deep, and there is a certain zen to just sailing through a storm, but it is not the pirate fantasy people wanted. It's a maritime trading simulator with guns. The software runs fine, but with a heavy emphasis on the service part of the game, providing a sense of adventure is forgotten, and the massive time investment is a lot of work for very little payoff. Redfall is probably the most heartbreaking entry here because it comes from Arcane, a studio known for top-tier stealth and world building. This is a vampire hunting experience you can play with friends, but it exists as a hollow, messy project. The town of Redfall has that classic Arcane environmental storytelling, but the streets are empty and the AI is non-existent. You can stand 5 feet away from a cultist and they will not even notice you. The vampires, which should be terrifying, just sort of float around until you shoot them with a stake launcher. It's a game that you're not sure what it actually is. Is it a looter? Is it a stealth game? Is it a co-op shooter? Either way, it fails at all three. In reality, for me at least, the most satisfying thing about it is the atmosphere of the town at sunset, but that was not enough to save it. The entire project felt like a massive miscalculation of trends. Playing it now is just a quiet, lonely stroll through a ghost town. It could have turned into something entirely different if Arcane Austin wasn't shut down in 2024, but I guess we'll never know.
Make way, good people! Clear their path!
I'll finish with Babylon's Fall. This is Platinum Games, the masters of action, teaming up with Square Enix, and it was a disaster. The game had this oil painting filter over everything that just made the screen look blurry and smeared. It was physically painful to look at for long periods. The combat had some interesting ideas, like using 4 weapons at once with spectral arms, but the mission structure was an endless loop of slogging through similar-looking areas. It was a live service game that felt like it was made on a budget of $10. The player count dropped so fast that the servers were shut down in 2023. It practically doesn't exist anymore. You cannot even play the campaign because it requires an online connection. This is another one of those games in the live service era built to last forever, yet did not even make it to its first birthday. We've seen a few of those since. It's an ugly and ultimately sad end for a project that could have been something special if they had just focused on the action instead of the monetization. There's a weird comfort in playing a broken game. Maybe comfort isn't the right word, it's more of an appreciation. Seeing everything fall apart on screen makes you realize how hard it is to get all these moving pieces working in the same direction. Everyone has that one disastrous title they spend way too much time defending or dissecting. What is a game you played that is a complete mess but you still think about it? Drop it down in the comments. If you found the video useful, then hit like. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time to do so. Take care.